Whatever you think the ending of a piece is, just lop off that last paragraph. And I think that's absolutely true. I think objectivity is, I think it doesn't exist. I think we might strive for it, but I don't think it exists because we all have our biases, but we all approach anything with assumptions, even if we don't realize they're assumptions. So for example, even what lines of inquiry I choose when I start reporting and researching a piece, that does betray some subjectivity. That does suggest that I'm interested in one thing over something else. Even how I structure a piece, the narrative, where I start, where I begin, what I choose to emphasize, what I choose not to emphasize, those are all reflections of my subjectivity, of any writer's subjectivity. And I think as a good journalist, it's important to recognize that we have so much power in that, and we have quite a bit of authority, but also to resist, figure out how to resist that as well. And you resist that by doing the reporting, by trying to approach lines of inquiry that might make you uncomfortable, but that are necessary to investigate. Well, I think any good long-form narrative is like a story, like a short story. You have a beginning, middle, and end. And if you can find a good story arc, that's fantastic. If you can find a character who transforms in that story arc, even better. If you can find a story that is not only interesting, but kind of captures something bigger, a big issue or policy debate that's happening in the world, I think that's the best. And I think sometimes people confuse long-form narrative with just writing a lot of words, but I actually think that's not the case. I think what really drives long-form narrative is action. If you are able to expand your scope and research and report and find a trove of information, but put it in elegant writing, I think that's the sweet spot. You want to be able to expand your lens, but tighten the writing. The best advice that an editor gave me was, when you're stuck, always structure a piece chronologically. And then you can decide where you want to place things, where you want to move things around. But I have learned that that advice has served me well, because sometimes writing a story chronologically is the best way to tell it. And sometimes writing it chronologically and realizing that, some things need to be shifted around, that an event in the middle of someone's life has to be placed first, that you can just kind of mess with, and it then becomes just a puzzle, and it becomes fun in a way. I think it often happens in interviews when I'm talking to someone, and I may have talked to this person multiple times, but at some point they'll say something and everything just clicks. And it could be that they are revealing to me information that I didn't know, or they're confirming something to me that I suspected. Great when that happens. But sometimes they give me a detail, and then I can imagine that detail, and I can imagine writing it, and then the story just kind of clicks in my mind. don't promise your sources anything. I mean, make sure you Google the sources before you interview them. It's actually shocking how many people don't prepare before they interview someone. I think because I was so aware of my surroundings when I was growing up, for whatever reason, I was really, really aware that the place in which I grew up has formed me. I take that as a given for anyone I speak with. And so when I talk to people, when I interview them, I don't want to just understand what happened to them, but I also want to understand how they grew up and what they saw, what their daily life was like, because that is what forms us. And so I actually tend to try to read a lot about a place. I try to understand its history. I try to understand what are the big events happening around the time that a character is growing up in, or that they're, if they're living that place. Because even if they don't have direct knowledge of an event, they were shaped by it in some ways. And I want to understand what that interaction has been like. In order to even start envisioning a piece, I find that I really need to just start a structure, start some skeleton outline to help direct me, to help direct my reporting, to help direct the research and where the story is going. And I actually love kind of using that to really figure out what those big questions are. What's that gray space? What are the questions I still haven't answered? And I find that just being able to very simply state what I know and state what I don't know, it helps me so much, especially in a months-long investigation. Because I've kind of been driven by journalism that tries to put readers in the worlds of people who might be foreign to them or who they might not know much about, I then decide to go all the way and say, well, let me actually put readers in that world. And that really does require capturing a scene in a very sensory way. So when I'm reporting, if I'm somewhere where an event is happening, for example, I do note things like the weather, of course, but also, is there a wind blowing? What does it smell like outside? What is the noise traffic like? What am I noticing as a person when I just stand here for a minute or two? What speaks to me? And, sometimes when I'm writing, I don't have the luxury to do that because I could be writing about an event that happened a few years ago that I wasn't present for. So I try to find other ways around it. I look at the weather archives, for example, or I just try to ask people who were present, tell me what you remember about your surroundings. And it's all to, you might not be able to capture it entirely, but to be able to capture as close to the texture as I can, I always strive to do that. You have to get down to the very, very sentence and sometimes word level. I mean, you have to ask yourself, what is the sentence doing? What am I offering the reader by putting down the sentence? As beautiful as it may be. But if it's just repeating something that you've already said, but in a nicer way, Or if it's just offering description without any action, then maybe it just needs to be cut. And I find that I write a piece, I will write something, I will think it's great, nothing needs to be cut. I will walk away. A couple of days, I will return to it and realize that I can cut about 1,000 words and it would be so much better. And that chiseling away, and it doesn't even have to be chunks of it, but to be able to chisel away at each paragraph or each sentence really elevates your writing more than, I think, maybe writers feel like it's stultifying, but it's not. It actually, I think, expands it and elevates it.